testing presentation, Professor Jesse Ribot, who is also a glass blower, and he also does filming, and he does ceramic sculpting. But in addition to that, he has got long-standing academic credentials in terms of environment and democracy, and issues about environment and vulnerability. He has worked in West Africa and other parts of the world, and he has taught in many universities, including University of Illinois. He has also been involved in other institutions like World Resource Institute, and has been a fellow in many universities, including the Max Planck Institute for Socioanthropology and the Harvard Center for Population and Development, and Stanford Center for Studies in Behavioral Science. And his presentation is on issues about climate change and adaptation, and I kindly welcome him to give his presentation this evening. Please come.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Got to configure my papers. Good evening. Thank you, TT, for the generous introduction. It's great to be here. I want to thank Asante Sana. I want to thank the organizing committee of IASC. I especially want to thank Tobias, who has put an enormous amount of energy into this, for inviting me to speak with you. Good afternoon, everybody. I can feel here in the last several days Lynn Ostrom's spirit, her spirit of learning and reflection and sociality, and I think she is really with us. Now, of course, she would be incredibly excited by some deep changes I see here in listening to presentations, like the fact that people are talking about critical theory and power and things she did not have a vocabulary for. But I think she sensed and understood they were there. Today, I'm going to give a talk. It's a sketch of new material. Presenting it to this distinguished audience, of course, provides me with the fear of embarrassment that I needed to develop this into a coherent talk and hopefully eventually into good scholarship, although I may not yet be there. So the talk title is Wallowing in Adaptation While Neck Deep in Vulnerability Toward Structural Climate Response. I want to actually, before getting into the talk, thank Mordechai, our first keynote speaker. I don't know if you're here. I want to thank Mordechai and Milka. Our first keynote speaker, I want to thank Mordechai for passionate insights on climate resource colonialism. It spoke so eloquently to materials I'm struggling with today. And thanks to Milka for your story, which is like what I present today about the structural causes of subordination and the production of vulnerabilities. You are both inspirations, and perhaps an applause for those guys and gals. I know I'm pointing this in the right direction, but it's not going. One slide ahead, please. In any event, for Milka, I did something which is, I wrote a children's book, not for Milka, but I'm presenting a little stanza of it here because it reminded me of that. And the children's book is called No to the Lorax, but this was one little piece that I thought fit. And that's the colonial officer with the rule book in his hands. It says rule book on it. And he says, look, here in the rule book, which you must obey, you have rights to the things that we don't take away. But we must take the wood, we must take the trees. Wait, how does it go? We must take the wood. I can't even remember my own poetry. So, we must take the wood as we must use the trees, so you'll have to make do with the stumps and some seeds. You can grow village woodlots, eucalyptus and pine. We'll help you to manage them through incentives and fines. If you listen, look, learn, and do as we say, even democratization will be in its way. We must protect forests from people like you so that people with business will have business to do. We know that narrative, and we know it well. And every forest villager that I ever worked with knew that and knew the absurdity of the discourses of the colonial and post-colonial officers. They heard it coming, and they said, oh, yeah, right, and did what they wanted to do, often sabotaging these projects quite effectively. So let me get on to my talk, which is today I will ask why the crises like famine and migration, now all being attributed to climate and climate change, why are they being attributed to this when it is clear they are caused by social and historical forms of exploitation, exclusion, marginalization, racism, and a set of global, national, and local institutions that channel wealth into a few nations and into the hands of a few people within them? Why? Also, why do climate scientists, when modeling the crises that follow climate events, deepen this problem by ignoring social causality? Note, I am not talking about climate change, as in the causes of climate change, when I talk about social causality. Climate change is an even bigger problem, and on which I totally trust climate science. I am focused on the social causes of crises that follow climatic events, causes of hunger, famine,
Recording stopped.
dislocation, and economic loss.
Recording
These are
in
things that happen
progress.
on the ground. When a storm or a drought comes along and a crisis follows, we social scientists know very well that the crisis was enabled by vulnerable, historically produced conditions on the ground. There's plenty of evidence of this, and affected people, like those dependent on commons, know this very well. This story is not at all new. As Jim Scott, quoting R.H. Toney on his writings on China in the 1930s, described the position of the peasant as, quote, that of someone standing permanently up to their neck in water so that even a ripple might drown them. Today, with 20 centimeters of sea level rise, the UN Climate Adaptation Fund, applying climate change increment logic, might propose or be used to raise this peasant 20 centimeters in order to restore that peasant to the same state of misery and risk they were in before the sea level rose. The Adaptation Fund would only help them avoid the incremental climate change-induced damage. This is not adequate. Indeed, climate change did not cause their problems. The real question is, why is this person so damn precarious? What put her and her whole family, her whole village, in the water in the first place? How and why was this person pushed over the edge of security into permanent risk? I would seek the root causes of her marginality and try to address them. Indeed, I would focus on the colonial and neocolonial increment to target causality for the vulnerabilities in place. In lieu of climate change adaptation based on the polluter pays principle, this new focus would imply, as Prakash Kashwan and I proposed, that we need an exploiter pays principle EPP instead of the old PPP, to address vulnerabilities. At least that might get us a much bigger global fund, in that the causes of these vulnerabilities and the damages come from a long history and not out of the sky. They don't tumble from the clouds. So, in essence, my question today is, why are analysts and policymakers wallowing in the shallows of adaptation when people are up to their necks in vulnerability? And in a sense, it is bringing my focus onto the analysts. That's right, sort of modeling the modelers, as I once called it, but that's a different story. You and I know there is no linear causal relation between climate events and climate damage or crisis. It is mediated by many elements of vulnerability with long causal histories. Indeed, different causes can be identified for crises that natural scientists present as identical. Migrants from Senegal, for example, from Niger, Syria, Latin America are all being called climate migrants, climate refugees, a misnomer, when they simply are not. These people are fleeing various forms of violence and economic deprivation. In Senegal and Niger, for example, Faye Sambo Turner and I interviewed many trans-Saharan migrants about why they migrate. This was in 2016 and 17. In Niger, migrants told us of limited prospect for gaining sufficient land to support their autonomy from fathers and older brothers. This was largely due to the purchasing of land by Niamey-based elites. Young men migrated for income to marry and to achieve that autonomy. By the way, these two cases, Senegal and Niger, I was going to develop them, but the time is much shorter than I thought. So rather than being half an hour of case, you're going to get about 30 more seconds. In Senegal, this dangerous migration was also about coming of age and lack of recognition in contexts of poverty generated by lack of access to markets, resources, social services, and representation. Weather and climate were never mentioned by these young migrants. Causes of migration are different, but not climate-related in Latin America and Syria. Causes of damage are social. Causes of migration are social. True for hunger, famine, economic loss. There are thousands of examples. So where is social cause in models used by modelers of climate-related damage, and then taken up by the media, unfortunately, and by policymakers? Where does it reside? The answers are not self-evident, and why it's not there is not self-evident, even if these answers might seem self-evident to me and many people I speak with. The classic reason for scientists to avoid social causality is the pretense of objectivity and neutrality in science. This is nonsense, as science is deeply normative. But I want to go further today. Other reasons abound. I want to explore some normative content of climate impact models. So we're going to turn to the main slides now, and I might need help advancing them. Click, click, click. Works very nicely. So we need the main slides, but if they don't appear, I continue without them. Oh, cool. Climate risk equation. That is me. Oh, but it has tile behind it. That's a new decor. Oh. Okay, either way, it doesn't matter. I'll look both ways. Basically, what I call the climate risk equation, I'm going to do this quickly, is that vulnerability is a predisposition to damage. That's all it is. It's a potential. A climate hazard is a weather event, trend, stressor of some sort. And climate and vulnerability lead to damage. Notice it's not plus, times, divided by, it is and. Both are necessary. Neither is sufficient. Okay? Without climate hazard, there is no damage, no climate damage. Without vulnerability, there is no damage. So, next slide, please, since this little critter is compromised. Okay, so what you have here is your basic hazard model. Climate event comes along, it meets a static social structure and outcomes: hunger, famine, dislocation, economic loss. The multiple outcomes of a single stressor. Next slide. If we take much time with the slide changes, we're going to run out. Okay, climate event or trend is the center of this. It causes everything. That's what causes. This model characterizes most models used in the analysis of climate risk. Okay? Next, please. The groundswell report, which came out on Latin America, on the migrations, said a change in climate has led to 5% change in migration. Nonsense. You can't make that as a mathematical calculation. It's impossible, because with different vulnerability, there might have been no damage. With higher vulnerability, it might have been a 200% increase in damage. The damage is a function of the precarity in place. The same event in different places causes different damage. The same event at different times in the same place, like in Bangladesh, where there were 500,000 deaths in the 1970s from Ebola. The same magnitude event hit in 2007, Sadir, and there were 3,000 deaths, a 150-fold decrease because there was planning. The vulnerability was on the ground, it didn't fall from the sky. So, next slide, please. The typical vulnerability model inverts this. You take a single damage and you analyze the multiple single damage here. Here's the single damage, and you analyze the multiple causes, right? The multiple causes of a single damage, which can be all kinds of political, economic, and social factors. Next slide. Now, you'll see that what happens is climate ends up on the margin of this diagram. And it's like, oh, well, and the IPCC, when I first introduced this to them, thought it was great, and then they did some studies, and then they kind of like moved back to the impacts framing. Although vulnerability has come up in their documents much more recently in the last report. Next slide, please. This one is Amartya Sen's entitlements type of a slide. And essentially, next slide, I'm going to just show that climate is still on the side of this in climate events, along with market fluctuations, state policies, surplus booms and slumps. Next slide. What is, can I wander with that mic? Is this on? Is this on? Is this on? No, I can't wander with that mic. Okay, so all I'm going to say, because it may not be big enough to read, is that Sen put entitlement failure, and poverty was related to that at the core, but he looked at lack of assets and lack of social protections, unexplained initial conditions. And I use the word unexplained because he's an economist. And economists don't look at the causes of the initial conditions. Capabilities was an individualized Hegelian sort of tradition situation, okay? But climate was at the margins of that. On to the next slide. Okay, this is my vulnerability analysis represented as a broader set of causes for the lack of assets and social protections, and an access set of relations around how people are able to benefit from these things, the sort of capabilities substitute. I did a paper recently on access failure as a parallel to entitlements failure. Next slide, and then quickly the next one. So 2 slides. Oh no, stay on this one, sorry. It explains initial conditions. Okay, I think this is alive. Back one. It explains initial conditions. Back 1 slide. And it basically looks at capabilities need explanation, stratified access to education, jobs, socially differentiated explanations in the way the political economic relations of access unfold. Next slide, please. And climate, again, is at the margin, which is fine. Climate is really changing, and it is the biggest problem we face. But you should analyze when there's a crisis how it happens, putting climate in its place. And climate put in its place means looking at what's happening to local people and how it affects them. Next. Oh, this was just a diagram I found. It's the vertical axis is climate change vulnerability as a function of the left is colonized, neither colonized nor colonial countries, and the right is colonial in terms of vulnerability. So the colonized clearly are vulnerable. That is just an outcome of a long set of histories that need to be analyzed when you look at climate change. Anyway, I'm gonna, I think, head on to the next slide, and I think I'm off to the horse races at the moment. Okay, you can turn the slides off for the moment. We'll be back to them in a while. I don't want to double the microphones. Here, I'll just turn this one off. Is that on? Good. Don't drop to the floor. So, why is causal analysis of vulnerability occluded, left out of climate impact models and discussions, and also, therefore, out of responses? In other words, it hides all the responses we could have had to reducing risk and vulnerability. The answers are many. They are contradictory, but they answer the same question. They are intersecting, and they are overdetermined. I will evoke only 7 of them. I made a list that was so long I couldn't sort through it. But the first, cause of disaster, is a special, first is that cause itself of disaster is a special category of causality because it is about suffering. The attribution of cause of suffering is fraught when it implies or implicates other humans. It is about responsibility and blame. This makes it a contentious arena of causality. As Morgan and Wilkinson pointed out, quote, suffering is always more than physical pain, more than violence, more than material deprivations, more than destruction, more than loss. Suffering is a state of being which unmakes our world. It has been the topic of many philosophers for a long time. Suffering evokes God and questions about why we are here. Suffering brings us to confrontation with existential walls of meaning. It brings us into question, or brings into question the meaning of life and the unity of God. Leibniz confronted this disunity through theodicy, giving pain a higher and positive purpose. Weber, however, viewed suffering as simply incompatible with a good God, bringing God into question. Levinas saw human inflicted suffering, such as the Holocaust, as bringing all meaning, including God, into question. And Nietzsche proclaimed the existential inability to believe in God, what he called the death of God, to mean that we must bear the weight of our own actions. We become responsible for our own world. Crisis can no longer be sloughed off as an act of God or argued, as in theodicy, to have a higher purpose. It can only be traced back to human action and human inaction. Suffering on the scale of climate change that impinges or implies, that is, possible end of the world or of humanity is itself also a special category of pain. It confronts all of us with stark existential suffering. The atom bomb, as Gunther Anders argued, made possible the end of history and posterity. It was an end to lineage, end to passing meanings and stories in life onto others or later generations. In short, it spelled loss of future, existential emptiness. On another front that I'll bring that back into, Evans, Pritchard, and Mary Douglas showed through ethnography that causes for suffering are something that people attribute to other people and to spirits or gods. Humans seek responsible parties for their pain. This, they argue, is human nature. There's probably a lot of variation in all of this and in all of our sentiments and feelings around it. But it would seem to me that as existential anxieties of climate crisis merge with social causality, as they merge with social causality, are the basis for something like revolution, making social causality quite scary, right? I mean, it's kind of like E.P. Thompson and Jim Scott's use of the moral economy of the peasant, where rebellion happens when subsistence is threatened. We have this meta level of threat now that is no longer isolated to those who know about atom bombs, but is globalized. So on a second front, totally different of why causality is contentious and why it is avoided, natural science stubbornness. We all know this. It's a second set of reasons for occlusion. Trained in natural sciences who tend to dominate climate impact and adaptation modeling are likely to reduce the social to a set of fixed conditions found in place. Take social conditions or vulnerabilities as a given that has no causality. They are reduced, social conditions are reduced to things like rocks, bananas, clams, elephants, whatever it is, they're just there. And they're things without history. They reduce vulnerability to an indicator of who is vulnerable, rather than asking why they are vulnerable. They reduce decisions within society to yes-no factors, despite multiple contingencies. They count only what is countable at the expense of the many things that count via values. They avoid anything they view as normative, which erases much of what is social. They take, and that's related to the maintaining legitimacy and objectivity. They take immediate correlation, like with weather, to override longer-term causal variables such as identity-based marginalization and exclusion from rights, representation, resources, markets, whatever, and other factors that might cause hopelessness, shaping decisions to migrate or decisions to invest in local security that then create a condition that correlates, perhaps, with a climate condition. As philosophers and others have argued, scientists also tend to ignore the intellectual lineage to which they belong, or to which they do not belong. They ignore those. They refuse other disciplines. We all know this, non-interdisciplinarity. I don't like the term interdisciplinarity, but much bigger conversation. This is damaging, myopic, and I would say unscientific. These factors all contribute, the factors that I've just listed, to natural science stubbornness and refusal of the social. There's another part of natural science refusal, and I call it, it's the third, scientisticalism, and that is scientistical dominance which leaves at the helm physical scientists guided by ignorance and fear of social causality. Many climate scientists, and I mean those studying the impact end of the spectrum, for example, cannot see the flooding of the lower Ninth Ward of New Orleans. They can't see that that was caused by the racist negligence of the Army Corps of Engineers, who failed to maintain levees in the poor black areas. It was not caused by a hurricane, by Katrina. Here, the ignorance of social comes into play. The social sciences, in the social sciences, non-events, which cannot be causal in the hard sciences, clearly cause damages. It's called negligence or illegality and stems from the very foundation of sociality, the social contract in law, custom, or convention. Those create human expectations, including moral economies and morals of all sorts. Expectation makes non-action, the broken contract, causal. Non-events can, in fact, be causal. Scientists also take contracts to be normative. And indeed, they are. But normative is empirical. Normative is an objective fact. Any real scientist would include them in their models. In short, racist social histories caused the crisis in New Orleans, but a complex set of relations and histories within science cause them to be ignored. Another scientisticalism is fear of infinite regression, infinite regress, no boundedness. Natural science is bounded, and it ties us up as well by the need for boundedness. Social causality, however, is unbounded. It's traced over time and space. We trace it out. We start with the problem and we trace causality out through chains of causality, progressive contextualization. Decisions to migrate, for example, have many interlinking and nested roots. Hopelessness and anxiety of Senegalese farmers. The case I know best is caused by low fixed prices of peanuts, cottons, and other goods, exclusion from transport. These are caused by oligopsonies, monopsonies, monopolies, interlocking credit labor relations. These are relics of elite urban merchants' relations with government. Most of these were established in the colonial area and have a long and complex history. And there are many other factors, whether it is the sedentarization of these pastoralists or what have you in the colonial period. There's a lot behind it. These cause today's migration. We could flash to the next slide. I don't know if it's worth it, but if it comes up, I'll look back. In any case, natural science causality is very limited to immediate correlation and what I call Mickey Mouse, boing, boing, you hit them over the head with the frying pan, David Hume sort of billiard ball models. Degrees of certainty required in natural science are also another damaging element. Chains of causality, they claim, introduce too many terms of uncertainty, and they do. So they erase them or ignore them. They are, however, erasing our best understanding, the world's best understanding of these events and crises, even if these understandings contain uncertainties. There's also what I call economistical creep, which is just that natural scientists who take economics to be science or to represent the social world end up occluding vast areas of social or causal analysis. By the way, that list is still there. Causal analysis, and that would include someone who I adore, like Amartya Sen, who does not explain the initial conditions of where those assets came from. As important as that is, it is not part of his disciplinary canon. Fifth is Mike Hume, another, not David Hume, but Mike Hume, a contemporary. Climate change reductionism, which is when all crises are blamed on climate change in order to show that climate change is bad. Well-meaning, but incomplete, unfortunately, and unscientific analysis comes out of this. The result is that this reduction obscures social and political economic factors that enable a hazard to trigger crises. And these are the factors that we might be able to address to reduce pain and suffering, to make people more secure. So it obscures many potential solutions. Sixth factor is futurism and projection, which is so similar to the reductionism one, I'll skip that. Last but not least is avoidance of blame, of indicating blame, of pointing blame at others, not blame by the scientists or blaming the scientists. A good pointer, excellent. Social causes point fingers of responsibility and blame. Thus, making social and political economic causes of crisis contentious and problematic. This makes social causes something scientists want to avoid. They have clearly chosen an analytic frame posed as scientific or objective choice that blames no one. This is a normative choice, driven by concerns outlined above, and which avoids pointing fingers of accusation. Social models establish blame of government or other institutions, who often fund research, for example. Another reason to avoid social causality, right? You don't want to blame your researchers, your funders. Of course, research funders also don't want fingers pointed at themselves or other institutions. Try getting root cause political economic research funded these days, you'll see. They say, oh, it must be solution-oriented, but it is. You first have to study the problem if you want to know the solutions. Or, please don't look at causality. We want a win-win situation. Let's fix everything by innovating. Don't worry about what is, let's innovate our way out. That's a very capital-centric perspective. We don't have to disturb the status quo. Let's not think socially. We need nature-based solutions. Or, please, go out and study success. By the way, I suggest you write that in your proposals. Study success, but ask the question of whether it really happened or not, and why. This is what funders want, precisely because they don't want to establish contentious social responsibilities, blame, or liabilities, or to establish grounds for reparations. The result is shallow research that misses social cause. Okay, into the last of my sections. So to me, it remains unacceptable that social sciences are silenced when they illuminate important causal elements of the crisis that we, the we's in the commons, and various do-gooder we's hope to avoid. I'm skipping my who are we discussion because of time, but I thought of it when I did my little 1 minute and that you may have seen. Natural sciences take vulnerabilities as received or given distributions and arrangements. They reduce vulnerabilities to indicators and quantified starting points. One starting point that they do not have to or nor desire to explain. This is the frame of analysis they choose, and I emphasize the word choose, a normative moral choice. And it's a normative moral choice because it has effects on lives, livelihoods, and well-being. It cannot be neutral. So, ways forward, very briefly. First, train natural scientists. in the social sciences, but I think it's also the inverse is needed. To be a good social scientist, you damn well better be a good natural scientist. You need to know the material that is the basis of people's lives and livelihoods. Admit the social as fact and as causal in models of climate-related crises and for climate change policy. Social facts have effects, from building skyscrapers to causing climate change to the racist criminal negligence that caused the flooding of the lower Ninth Ward in New Orleans. These are scientific, material realities, facts. Unbound analysis, that's another solution. It's a methodological one. Causal tracing should go as far back in time and as far out in space as we have the time, resources, means to analyze. And the chains of events that impinge on a given outcome need to be understood starting from that outcome, that crisis, that hunger, that famine, that place. Bounded systems do not exist. They are artificial. Recognizing that boundaries are chosen normatively is important. Most plausible, unbounded, causal chains should be chosen to guide policy. History and structure must be taken seriously, a la E.P. Thompson, José de Castro, Michael Watts, Achille Mbembe, Taiwo Mordechai Ogada, who spoke to us a few days ago, who put the situation, the context in history. While long causal chains bring in uncertainty, we still can judge them, and they still often represent our best knowledge. Further, these problems orient integrative methods like progressive contextualization that start with the problem and remember that problems are about values and must be about values of those who experience loss or damage. Right? So our research it starts with values, it moves on to choosing methods via values because they have different implications, our methods. We have findings that we go for rigorously. We come out with results and we interpret them and apply them subjectively and normatively, applying moral criteria. Use the full range of causes that we find to identify and develop interventions. That is important. And acknowledge the social implications of social causal knowledge. Responsibility and blame are always implied by analytic choices. These implications shape recursively the choice of frames and models. And in conclusion, let us approach the causes of crises consciously, especially those associated with climate and climate change. The social is core to their cause, and it is the only path to their solution. It is key. All solutions that humans could influence are, by dint of the word could, subject to the notion of should, and are therefore social and moral. Could involves all sciences. Should is social and moral, a social and moral decision. In the end, it looks like natural sciences have colonized the climate crisis, discourse at least. It is time to decolonize. The very fact that we even have to study how scientists think and justify their models of occlusion reflects the neo-colonial world we live in. Scientists, along with economists, are part of a bigger machine of domination that Mordechai described. We must decolonize science and the commons. Science is a great asset. Let those in need harness it for good. Climate change is certainly the biggest problem humanity faces. We must stop it to survive. But what if we survive? Really, what if we actually survive climate change? We'll need to also have attended to social well-being, equity, and justice so that we arrive in a world we and that's many we's, find worth living in. Thank you. Asante sana.
Thank you very much. Very well done. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We can take a few questions, and I like that idea of deconstruction, especially the natural scientist. We have one there, another one here. I hope there's someone who can move the mic, please. There's one at the back there. Yes, let's start here, and then we go in the middle there, and then at the back.
Yeah, thank you very much. I want to appreciate the organizers for this event.
Please say your names when you...
I'm Michael Aridotun Oke from Nigeria. Your illustrative words was very powerful, and the genetical issue which you raised, basic with scientific proof, was excellent indeed. I'm also considering that the issue of climate change, according to the school of thought, people say that it is caused by human factors. Yeah, do you agree on that? That's my question.
That what is called human factors?
Human factors, the ways of living, the ways of doing things affected the environment, that we are the causes of the climate change. That's the school of thought. I want you to throw light on it. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you want to take a...
In the middle there, excuse me. And then at the back. Oh, sorry.
I'll start asking... Oh, do they have... Oh, you have them.
Yeah,
Good.
thank you. Thank you very much for that. I'm Fiona Noonan, University of Birmingham. I just wanted to pick you up on, at the beginning of the talk, you critiqued Lynn Ostrom for neglecting power. And I thought that was really missing from your final slide and your ways forward. I'm not thinking in terms of analysing power. I'm thinking that those with power and wealth will stop what you're trying to do and what you're suggesting. They will stop the unbounded analyses. They will stop bringing in the social into the modelling. And so what do we do about that? Because I think that's the biggest challenge of all.
Yes,
Wow.
at the back there, and then try to...
Three is all I can handle.
Either, yes, okay. Welcome, second round, please. Thank you.
Pratiwi, an Indonesian scholar now based in Germany, in University of Kassel. Thanks, Jesse, for your lecture. You talk a lot about causality. My question isn't that for causal powers or causal elements to be effective, then we need agency. I think what I miss from your lecture is that about role creation, role passing, so passing roles across time and space, and role creation, so new roles, because I think that probably would be important when we talk about, well, to make use of our understanding of causality to develop interventions. So we talk about the concrete roles. Thank you very much.
Thank you for these three first questions. Mike, yeah, there are human factors, but human is too big. Things happen in real places at real time. It's people. People with names in places. And human factors, if you want, social, political, economic relations, people who are in different classes, different castes, different genders, different religions, different residencies, citizen, non-citizen, face the world differently. So if you don't explain the causality of those positionalities, then you do not have a very deep model. And that's the shallowness of much of the adaptation response, is boiling it down to human factors that you can quantify and use as indicators. It's a place-by-place thing. Theo, that's a very good, observation. I would say that you're absolutely right that the powerful are stopping, And the point that I made about donors not wanting to fund people who are doing causal analysis that critiques their nation, critiques capitalism. I generally do not sit around saying capitalism caused this, right? I find that too broad brushstroke, although I think it is a big problem. But I think there's no exteriority to capitalism. I think we have to accept that it's something we are within. Others think differently. That's a big arena. But my feeling is this, that we need to fight each of the instances in which we have this problem of our research being stopped, of commons being grabbed one by one. Like democracy. Democracy is never achieved. It's a battle continuously. And once it's achieved, it is lost and then re-achieved. So I don't see the future as an asymptotic line toward some single outcome. And as Mao Zedong even said, not that I like quoting Mao, he's quite a bastard. Mao Zedong said, the revolution is never over. And that's exactly what he meant. Stratification is a continuous process. It will never end. And we will have to always be on top of it. Pratibhi, I don't know what you're referring to by role creation, role passing, and new roles, but it sounds to me, am I right that this is about the formation and education of people and authorities that play roles within society? Just a brief, because...
Yeah, thanks for asking back. I mean, structures, I mean, this is sometimes could be very abstract. I mean, like capitalism. But capitalism will be like effective, you know, to their roles, you know. It's just like reacting to your analytical framework. But I really thank you to say that there is no externalities to capitalism.
Okay, I'm glad I addressed your question inadvertently.
Thank you. Let's start one there, and then we can have those two from that side. Yes.
Where's the mic?
Hi, I'm Lavanya from BITS Pilani Hyderabad campus. I really enjoyed the way you framed your entire talk. So I was thinking that even when, so speaking to a lot of people who have been part of climate change writing and authors, the ways in which models are chosen and the language that is used to explain it is highly normative. Because the reason that so if we historicize and contextualize climate change modeling, we also find that the objective is to address policy science, therefore it has to be simplified, therefore vulnerability is understood in this way, and that's historicized within the entire IPCC legacy that comes within it, right? So the entire framing of climate science is very normative in and of itself, not just the ways in which they measure vulnerability.
All science is normative.
Thank you. There was another hand up there. Thank you.
Yeah, Stefan Pardow, University of Bonn, Germany. Could you please entertain us with your thoughts about interdisciplinarity? Is it the term? Is it the practice? How should we educate the natural scientist?
Thank you. Let's come to this side. Yes, I'll come to you. Let's start here. Please pass over the mic.
Thanks a lot, Jose. I'm Onyango Uma from the University of Nairobi, and I'm an anthropologist. When I hear the word deconstruction, I hear like you saying we should restore to factory settings. And therefore, my question is it time we burn the whole house down? And what are the next steps? Thank you.
Thank you very much. You allow take those two, then you can answer. Is already, we'll raise the hand before, and then we'll go to the one behind you. Yes, please.
Thank you. I'm Dusty Becker, nonprofit natural scientist. If we are to be responsible for our own world, if we're in the Nietzsche era and the Anthropocene, as many have said, so you're calling for moral choice to end suffering. What are our moral obligations to the non-human life forms that sustain us? What is the role of our numbers and our impacts on your framework to end suffering?
Thank you. One more, and then we'll let the presenter respond.
Yeah, thank you very much for your thought-provoking and inspiring presentation. My name is Marie-Louise. I'm a biologist working for a nonprofit in Switzerland. I would very much love to implement what you are recommending. However, I see one hurdle that might be quite difficult to overcome, and that is blind spots. So, one of those well-meaning people hoping to contribute to positive change, but having grown up in a system coined by a neocolonial mindset and structural racism, I think it happens very quickly to fall back into things we would not want to fall in. So maybe you have any advice on how to uncover blind spots in the work that we're doing. Thank you.
Great. I think that's enough for me to handle at the moment. I'm going to start with Marie because it's a very easy one to address, and that is, I'm a researcher. I make these recommendations because they seem to be a first step in thinking about how I go back to my research, because I'm an applied researcher. I'm interested in change. But I think the way you do it is continuing to fight them. I don't think they're going to go away. I think there are blind spots and resistance, and you have to observe and study that resistance as you come up against it. It's not, I mean, we are in an iterative set of recursive relations that make this a very complex and difficult situation. We want to produce narratives that help open up those blind spots, and hopefully they will become higher level narratives. But obviously, power travels through narrative, and we are often not on the side of power. So it's complex. I don't have answers to these questions, at least not all of them. Labinat, normative language. I don't think I got the question, but I agree with you that it is normative language. And it is important to acknowledge that, because in the history of science and social studies of science, the study of the spin of an atom is a subjective intervention. It has to do with the purpose for doing it. That's normative. It has to do with the motives of the individual doing it. It might be around having a job. It has to do with the instruments available and what instruments one can get other humans to fund, for what reasons and purposes those are believed. So it doesn't make the outcome non-material. It makes it part of a subjective process. Interdisciplinarity. I have a degree in physics. First, a degree in energy and environmental policy and planning, then a degree in political economy, a PhD basically, and I've been to all kinds of institutes and all kinds of places and traversed all sorts of disciplines, and I consider myself undisciplined, okay? And I mean that, but rigorous. You choose your methods, not based on the canon of a discipline, but based on the nature of the problem you are interested in and the reasons you're interested in it. And a problem is always when somebody cannot do something they desire to do. Either something bad is happening to them that they want to stop, or something good that they want to achieve and can't. That's a normative thing. And the methods you develop around a problem are as normative as the definition of a problem could be. And you trace out causally, through progressive contextualization, the chains. So I consider that undisciplined knowledge but I consider it rigorous knowledge, and I struggle with it. You can't be inter-epistemological, but you actually can be. You can shift your epistemology as you judge the visions and understandings of those with whom you work. You can do the same ontologically. You can traverse. And that's why I said that my findings are not only contradictory and complex in what I've been looking at. They're also overdetermined. There's so many factors that come from different theoretical perspectives that push for the same outcome. Onyabo, deconstruction and facts. I cannot really give a good answer to your question. I struggle with this because I think the social is, in material aspects, that which it does, it produces outcomes that are observable, measurable. I think that interpretation is constructed in many ways. By the way, I don't think I use the word constructed in my talk. I don't usually use the word socially constructed. I think it's too slippery. I want to understand concrete situations. Does that get at your concern? We can always take it up further. Dusty, responsible, Anthropocene, non-human responsibilities. Yeah, we are supposedly in the Anthropocene. I think of myself, so this thesis I'm developing, which is really sketchy, I have a terrible habit of never presenting anything that I presented before. And so I always end up, little pieces are from before, of course, but I always end up, struggling with what I'm thinking about. It's about sociodyssey. I actually think we need to write something like a sociodyssey rather than the theodicy. And that's another discussion to have, but I think we're in the socio-scene, the scene I want to be on. But non-human responsibilities are important. And quite frankly, I think Pope Francis, in his encyclical, addresses it quite well. We depend on nature, we damn well better take care of it. He justifies the valuing of nature as nature being God's creatures. Other philosophers judge pain and suffering in nature by the fact that if we are cruel to nature, it makes us cruel to other humans. I don't think we can know the feelings, sentiments of another being, not without language. And so, unless somebody can speak to the animals, I don't have a real, I think, adequate answer to that. And that is all.
Thank you very much. I think let's give chance to the community online if there are questions.
I think we're going to have to wrap up, is what I'm being told. Yeah.
Yes, go ahead.
Parallel to yesterday. At least
I have a question
correlation.
online.
A trend line.
Tuka, is that working?
Can you hear me? I have a question,
Yes.
which I put in the chat,
Can you
and that is why not educate the social scientists to educate the world how to solve complex problems without markets or state, as proposed by Ostrom and proved by system scientists that have designed self-governing automobiles and other devices, and which is adopted by all living things that are self-regulating and self-governing. There's a world gap of knowledge by social scientists of how to achieve the Ostrom vision.
I can't disagree with you. I think there are tremendous gaps in knowledge, which is part of why what I'm getting at is stop erasing social understanding and knowledge in even systems models, which I have looked at. The Groundswell report and others, ABMs, these are very incomplete, and they are selective in the knowledge and understanding of causality that they employ.
but they haven't adopted the science of governance. It's a science. Ostrom's work is grounded in system science. You ought to study it, please.
Okay.
And spread the word.
Alhamdulillah.
And encourage deans to introduce courses to educators, to introduce bottom-up stakeholder governance, to overtake the command and control toxic dictatorships that all universities now teach in MBA courses and courses of business and government. It's the social scientists that are undermining democracy and the environment, not the natural scientists.
I agree. I think both are. I think there's a lot of knowledge we need to struggle to bring into play in our actions, and we need to do it based on those understandings. Thank you.
Well, that's positive, because most of your presentation has been negative. It's just been describing the problems, and it's not leading us to solutions.
Exactly. Win-win.
Lose-lose.
Thank you very much. And
As I think it was Popeye who said, what if everything goes bad, and we all lose? I think I'm very positive, actually, and very optimistic that the
Your talk was not.
I thank you for your assessment.
Thank you.
thank you very much. I think I'm a national scientist, and I'm persuaded that the African Climate Summit is coming in 2 months, and it's something to think about as we think about the national causes of climate change. So thanks a lot, Jesse.
Thank you.
Now's a clap for him, and thanks a lot. That will go long in terms of contribute to the debate on
Thank you
climate
all.
change. Thank you very much. I still holding the key to this hotel, LOTOS. It is room 506. Indeed, someone doesn't want to sleep on the verandas. Otherwise, the commons are still available